Hello, this is the lecture on using alarms. After this lesson, you should be able to create an alarm with condition-based triggers, create an alarm with event-based triggers, and you should know how to view and acknowledge triggered alarms. So what's an alarm? It's a notification that an event or a condition has occurred. Some are default. You can create custom ones. Here's a list on the right here of some default alarms that are built in, and this is only a partial list. There's all kinds of fun stuff in there. So you can look at the data store usage, health of hardware. That's a common one that pops up. Battery status on the host, power failures, license, reaching license capacities. You can create custom alarms, or even these alarms here that you see, and apply them to virtual machines, hosts, clusters, data centers, data stores, networks, distributed switches, all kinds of different objects. So to create an alarm setting, you right-click on the inventory object itself. So if you want to create an alarm like for a virtual machine, and you click alarm and add alarm, and this is what the display looks like, or the wizard looks like as you walk through it. And there you go, alarm type. Well, what are we actually looking at? And then the next option below that is, are we looking for conditions or states, or are we looking for events? We'll talk about what the differences are there. A condition, or there's two types essentially. An alarm requires a trigger, so a trigger has to happen first, and then you set the alarm based on the trigger. And there's condition or state triggers, which can be CPU usage, RAM usage, a data store or a network interface card disconnected. So that would be, the CPU and RAM usage would be an example of condition, and then state would be whether or not the NIC is disconnected or data store is disconnected. And then there's events. Examples of events, would be like a virtual machine powered on, virtual machine cloned, a vMotion operation performed, virtual machine edited, license expired, hardware has changed, something like that would be an event, something that actually happened, right? So looking at conditions, condition triggers are based on thresholds and or durations. And so there's a lot of different options that we can set here. In this particular example, we're looking at VM CPU usage for the first one. And so we set our condition is above, and there's different levels of triggers as well. There's warning, there's alert, there's warning and alert. And so the first one, warning, in this case, is going to be triggered when CPU usage is above 75% for more than 5 minutes. And so that's the threshold and duration, where you can choose not to have the duration at all. If you just want it, as soon as it gets to 75%, then give us a notification. But if we want to say, okay, go to 75, but let's not alert or even warn until this has been at 75 for 5 minutes. And then the alert would be kind of, escalating it to the next level. So if it gets to 90% and it stays at 90% for 5 minutes, then let's send an alert. Now, so there's two different triggers. There's a warning trigger and then there's an alert trigger. And you can set alarms for either or both of those. Maybe when it gets to warning, you don't necessarily want to know. You want to capture it and you want to have that trigger, but you don't necessarily want to send an email. Or maybe you want to have different actions for a warning than you want to have for an alert. Maybe the warning you just want to send an SNMP trap to a monitoring utility. But for an alert, you want to send an email to the entire world so that all your admins know, hey, we need to take care of something here. Configuring event triggers a little bit different. They're arguments, but there's not as much granularity. It's pretty much it happened or it didn't. The operator can be is equal to is not equal to. So different operators in there, but it's more about did it happen or did it not. There's not the threshold business happening there. You can set up different reporting options here, and so this kind of avoids like hysteresis or small changes, and you can also avoid repetition. So if we look at this particular example here, the idea is when do you want to repeat an alarm rather than just keep sending the alarm over and over and over again. You can have it set a send a second alarm only if the condition or the state gets worse. So if we look at that previous example where we have CPU usage is above 75% for 5 minutes, And then we go into the reporting section and we repeat the triggered alarm when the condition exceeds 20% more. So from 75, we go 20% more would take us to 90%. And we're going to do that for the frequency of 10 minutes. So if it goes up by 20% and it stays up at that additional 20% for another 10 minutes, then we're going to go ahead and send a second alarm. So that allows you to kind of, know if the issue is escalating or not. And then you have to configure the action. So the action is, what are you actually going to do? What is the actual alarm based on that trigger? You can do a lot of different things. So every alarm can send an email, or it can send an SNMP trap, or it can run a command. So an SNMP trap might be sent off to one of those third-party utilities such as SolarWinds. You can send that out there. SolarWinds can capture that trap and log it, send an email, whatever SolarWinds decides to do with it. That's the purpose of the SNMP trap. Or you can run a command, call a batch file, or who knows, maybe execute something that's going to resolve a particular issue automatically for you. Now, virtual machines and hosts actually have more alarm actions. If it's a virtual machine or a host that you are setting this alarm for, you can power on a virtual machine, power off a virtual machine, suspend a virtual machine, reboot a host, or shut down a host. So looking at some of the different settings to be able to send email and to be able to send the SNMP traps, then you have to specify the destinations and the parameters. So this is outside of alarms, but this is back into, under the main menu bar there in your vSphere client. Go to administration and vCenter server settings, and you have these different options. So if we just look at mail, you have to set your SMTP server and the sender account, some other information. For SNMP, you have to set that up as well. Who are you actually sending this trap to? And then you can have multiple receivers that you're sending the trap to. It doesn't have to be just a single server. You can have multiples there. Viewing and acknowledging alarms. So once you get the alarm notification, how do you look at it? How do you see more detail about it? And how do you clear that alarm? Well, under the alarms tab is where you can do this. You'll see there's events and alarms. You don't see the events tab on there. Yeah, you do tasks and events just next to alarms. So you can see events there, things that have happened, but then you can see the alarms themselves. So that'd be the first place you go, to the alarms, to see, okay, well, what caused this to go off? And you can see the definitions there as well. But a lot of times under alarms, you don't get a full detail as far as what happened. You kind of have to dig in a little more sometimes. And the next place you often would go is to the tasks and events to see maybe what was that actually triggered this alarm. I mean, you know what triggered it because you built the trigger, or maybe somebody else built it and told you. But nonetheless, what led up to that trigger in the first place. So you can see on their tasks and events. But nonetheless, once you are looking into this, you maybe want to acknowledge the alarm. That's that first option. It's grayed out right now, but you can right click on it and acknowledge the alarm. So that way, if another administrator comes in behind you, they can see that somebody else is already looking at this. Or, if you come back to this later, you can see in the upper right-hand corner here that there's this little sign here that says that an alert has been generated. It would be the yellow one if it was the warning. And this actually shows up the entire time. It's not just because we're under alarms. Even if you're under getting started or summary, you would have this little icon up here telling you, hey, you have something you might want to take a look at. And so you'd go into your alarms and you acknowledge the alarm. When you acknowledge it, this clears this thing out here. I'm sorry. It resets this to acknowledge, and then when you clear the alarm, it'll actually clear this thing out up here. So it's not popped up in your face anymore. So now, hopefully, you can create alarms with condition-based triggers. You can also create alarms with event-based triggers, those that just happened or didn't, essentially. The condition ones being based on thresholds and durations as well. And I just showed you briefly how to view and acknowledge alarms.